Metaphor ReFantazio recently came out, and I was pretty sure it was going to be easy. So when it came to my first playthrough of the game, I modded it to make every archetype weak to everything, making the game harder in two ways. First, obviously I would be taking increased damage. And second, thanks to my weaknesses, the enemy could act up to twice as much, which combined with the increased damage, makes it pretty hard to survive even just the regular encounters. As for any additional rules, the only one I had was I cannot equip any equipment that visually changes my affinity. For the difficulty, I actually used another mod to allow me to start on Regicide for my first playthrough. However, the first tutorial boss was actually way too hard and I had to switch to hard. So let's begin the game in the middle of the desert, where I ignore the prompts to not fight the enemies and die because of it. So now I run through this clearing and make a sprint for Grand Trad, the first city for the game, where our objective was to head off to the recruitment building, and here we got to name our hero, who I called Luigi to go with the name I named myself with Mario. Additionally, here they give us a choice of a stat to specialize in, and I went with Endurance to hopefully prevent any situations in which I would get one-shot. After this, we meet Stroll on the way to a fort that ends up being under attack, so we run in there and confront the first enemy of the game with the evil Eggman. Here I received the tutorial prompt for Regicide difficulty that told me it increases weakness damage by 3 times, and I realized that I might have to switch to hard. Anyway, what's noteworthy for this point of the game is we don't actually have any archetypes, so the fights here are completely normal and unaffected, so I just fought every enemy in this place, and I leveled up twice and placed both points into Endurance. With that done, I reached the end of the dungeon and began the first boss fight for this game, where we don't do much damage and Stroll dies, initiating a cutscene where Stroll almost dies, but Luigi rips out his heart, awakens to the power of Archetype, and this challenge truly begins, with me immediately dying. So next time I defended so they couldn't exploit my weakness. Then the legs and wings became a target that we could attack, which hit their weakness, granting us another turn that I used to defend, so we could survive their attacks and gradually take down the legs and wings. That halves the damage we will take from the boss's attacks that use those parts. Next, I had to heal, but the boss hit me 3 times and I instantly lost. I tried the fight a couple times now and was pretty sure I needed multiple lucky dodges in a row to win, as dodges would instantly end the enemy's turn. So I replayed the intro and invested all my stat points into agility, hoping to maximize my chances to dodge, but even with a high agility stat, they were still very likely to hit me, and I needed at least 4 dodges in a row to win here. So after like an hour of attempts, I gave up, started a new game again, and now played on hard. After like 20 minutes, I reached the boss again, and this time they were much easier because their damage was literally reduced by 3.5 times. So even when they attacked 4 times in a row, they dealt less than half our max HP, so we just attacked when we were healthy and healed when we were low for an easy boss fight. We now met up with Brius, camp out for the night, and encounter the unfamiliar man, Moore, who is fascinated by the power of Archetype, so we shake his hand, gain him as a follower, then wake up. Now, our objective was to head off to a mine so we can sneak into the royal capital to assassinate Luis, to break a curse on the prince so he can rule the land since the king died in the intro cutscene. Anyway, on the way to the mine we get introduced to mechanics like if you hit the enemies, they die, and if the enemy hits you, they ambush you and you probably die. Fortunately, in this game, if the main character dies, you don't just instantly game over, so that's pretty nice. After an ambush from some soldiers that serves as both the guarding tutorial and the back and front row tutorial, we arrived at the mine, and inside we found Captain Klinger, whose name is an anagram for a Pokemon. Kingler now says he was responsible for not sending any soldiers to help the village Stroll was born in when it got destroyed by a human, this game's monsters, and his parents were killed, making him angry, and he now awakens to the warrior archetype and a battle begins. This fight's pretty easy. The mage guys buff Kingler's defense, so I focused them first, and most of the time the enemies targeted Brius, who doesn't have an archetype yet, so they didn't really deal much damage to him. The most interesting turn here was at the end, where they used Mage Flame for AoE damage, and followed up with a Mage Fire to kill Stroll. But before they could attack again, we just killed them. Stroll now shakes our hand, unlocking the warrior archetype, and causing us weakness to get sent to more again, where we gain the Mage archetype from Gallica, and here we get to choose what archetype to give Grius, that I decided on Warrior since he had pretty high strength. We could now progress further into the mine, and here I found out the hard way that if I'm ambushed, I pretty much just instantly die. Towards the end of the mine was a boss fight, and I had a lot of trouble with this guy. The main problem are their powerful AoE fire attacks, that are pretty much impossible to recover from since we can't really heal that much at this point in the game. Fortunately, they don't start with this attack, as at first they concentrate and target the front row. Then by backing off to the back row, we could ensure this attack would miss to end their turn, and on their next turn is when they start to get deadly, as they both buff their attack and defense, and can now use AoE attacks that had a chance to just one-shot Stroll. With their extra action, they usually killed someone else, and we couldn't possibly recover from this position, so it was a reset. Next time, I was trying to end the fight before they could do anything deadly, using items to lower defense and hammering their ice weakness with Luigi, who I had on Mage. My other two party members were using Diagonal Slash and sometimes using an ice chunk to allow for an extra turn. Unfortunately, even while maximizing my damage, I was just short of killing them, and on the turn after, two party members died and I pretty much lost. This still ended up being my best opening play. And on my next attempt, by just getting lucky with a damage roll, Stroll survived the boss's AoE, and I had dealt enough damage that a strike from both Luigi and a revived Grius was enough to secure us the win. After breaking this crystal, we found a dragon and a stealth segment, where you can choose to either sneak past the dragon or fight them for some good rewards. So obviously I chose to fight the dragon, who was pretty tough because they do a lot of damage, and they also have this AoE attack that was pretty much an instant fantasy is dead if it happens. With my current setup, I was pretty sure this fight was impossible, so I changed both Grius and Stroll to Mage and fought a couple low-level enemies to learn an ice spell that could strike the dragon's weakness. I at first tried to spam ice magic to take the dragon out as fast as possible, but I didn't have quite enough damage to kill them before they killed me, so next time I attacked with 3 ice spells and used the 3 extra turns to defend with everyone, so the dragon couldn't exploit our weaknesses and we could freely attack. Unfortunately, I couldn't continuously use the strategy, as eventually I had to heal, usually with fairy dust, and risk the dragon striking my weaknesses, which unfortunately resulted in a loss this time around. But a couple tries later, I was lucky enough that the dragon targeted someone who was guarding, and by keeping Grius in the front row, the boss's tail swipes sometimes only hit one party member since it hits everyone in the same row. Then by gradually damaging them, I finished them off, they flew away, and I was rewarded with a powerful sword. At the end of the mine was a Mario Party minigame, and after resting, we arrived at our destination, Grand Trad. For now, we spent the night at an inn that Grius knew about, where we gained the healer archetype from Maria. Tomorrow we arrive at the King's funeral, where, as expected, Luis shows up in his signature egg carrier from Sonic Adventure, where he drops down a dead human. After this, the royal palace breaks out of the ground, and using magic, the dead king tells everyone that the next king will be whoever the people wish for it to be on the day of the hero. Seeing an opportunity to strike, Grius attempts to assassinate Luis, but is stopped by mysterious magic that the king has put in place to stop anyone from killing any of the top-ranking candidates in the Become King popularity contest. Unexpectedly, the old man with suspiciously high stats dies. Then a guy called Zorba summons a bunch of skeletons and a battle begins with them striking first, critting and inflicting Stroll with anxiety. Then they boost their hit rate to 100%, slash me a couple times for very low damage, and just stare at me. After unleashing 4 light attacks, just one enemy remained, who dealt like no damage and did nothing again, so it was an easy fight. We now meet Red Crest Knight and venture forth to the Grand Cathedral, an area that has no mini-bosses and is quite easy. Unfortunately, we were forced to leave as some rubble collapsed, but Hulkenberg told us about a side entrance, so we left and entered from the mausoleum, where we found just a generic soldier guy who calls forth zombie Grius, who is quite powerful, and just when we were about to die, Hulkenberg awakens to the Knight archetype, initiating a fight against Grius. For this fight, I found a strategy that seemed quite effective for this run, as I had Hulkenberg use Knight's Proclamation to redirect attacks her direction. Then with light attacks to strike Grius' weakness, I had enough turns to defend with her. So on Grius' turn, he would be forced to attack her and couldn't exploit her weakness because she's defending. So the fight was overall very easy. After the fight, we tell Hulkenberg about the secret relating to the prince being alive but cursed, therefore she decides to join the team. We shake her hand and gain the Knight archetype. Now, there were 10 days until the day of calamity. For now, I just did as many quests as I was able to, then sat on a bench to have level 2 wisdom to pick up Brigitte's quest. After this, I prepared some equipment from both the church and the armor store, and decided I was ready to enter the mausoleum. Inside, we found Parapus Woman, who we agreed to help find someone she's looking for further inside. That seemed to be behind this door, that we needed a key to open that was just down these stairs. Sadly, the girl Parapus Woman was looking for was dead, but Katharina still shook her hand, unlocking the Brawler archetype. We now killed some dogs, found some zombies, and looked down on a bridge to find a door emitting an evil black mist. That once opened, we fought 5 whole zombies, resulting in a very easy battle that rewards us with a key to a chest. With punch after punch after punch, I stormed through the next area, reaching the first mini-boss fight for this dungeon, against 4 skeletons and a mage captain. At first, I tried for a meteoric fist to take them all out, but I missed and lost all my turns. So they buffed attack and fired off attack into attack, leaving just Luigi standing, so I had to retry. Fortunately, Meteoric Fist hit this time, killing 3 skeletons, but we were just short of killing the Mage Bone Man, and they killed Stroll and Hulkenberg. Next time, I managed to beat all the skeletons. However, doing this caused the Mage Captain to spam AoE magic attacks that I couldn't survive. So my plan now became that I would keep a single skeleton alive so the boss would buff rather than attack, setting Hulkenberg up to use Meteoric Fist again, dealing just enough damage that Luigi could kill the skeleton, and with 2 slicers, Stroll just barely killed the Mage Captain, ending a pretty tough fight. Up on the next floor, the path to the elevator up to Zorba was blocked, so we had to rummage around, move a statue down, and then finally fight a boss fight that was very easy as I dispatched 3 targets on my first turn by firing off light attacks. As for their counterattack, they just hexed us and dealt minor damage, so my victory was assured with a few more Hummers. With this crystal broken, we could attempt to head up to the next floor, but we were intercepted by 2 sword captains and a mage captain. Here I was trying to figure out their weaknesses, and while I did this, I got destroyed by their powerful AoE attacks. However, on my next try, I focused the sword captain to the left, using Hulkenberg to strike the mage for an extra turn. This secured me a kill on 1 enemy, then they responded by buffing, then attacking, then buffing again. By focusing the mage, I now dispatched another enemy, but it came at the cost of Stroll's life. Despite that, by striking twice with ice magic and defending with Hulkenberg, we lived to see another turn, which fortunately was all I needed to win, as the final enemy died to a slicer, permitting us access to the top floor of this place, where I died to a regular encounter twice. But now we reached Zorba, who scares us away with evil bone magic, so we have to grab the giant portrait of Luis and silly use it as a shield to advance forward, making Zorba run away. In pursuit of him, we stumble upon the Scepter Chamber, where we realize the Royal Scepter has been taken, so we chase Zorba through this door. I realize what the next boss is going to be, and we reach the top of the building. The king now takes the scepter from Zorba, as it's only allowed to be used by the king. Afterwards, a fight against Zorba begins. At first, I was just trying to find out Zorba's weakness, which I couldn't find, but for his summoned undead, they were weak to light, and surprisingly quite tough to deal with, as they hit my weakness, which gave Zorba another turn that he used to summon even more of them. With my current setup, I actually couldn't kill them fast enough to win here, and I eventually was worn down and killed. So I switched Stroll to healer so I could use AoE light magic with Synthesis to help fight off the undead when 2 were summoned. Since during this fight I could strike weaknesses, I additionally had enough turns to do the Knight Proclamation and Guard combo to prevent my weakness from being struck. With healing magic and items to keep Hulkenberg healthy, the fight wasn't anything too special. I just had to be careful and prioritize offense when Zorba inflicted the zombies with Rage, which doubles their damage. After a close call or 2, we won, so we ask Zorba for Luis's location, but he refuses to answer, brings the dead human back to life, and then just kills himself. To protect Grand Trad, we left the building to fight off the human. On my first attempt, I was just trying to figure out if they had a weakness, but on their turn, I was attacked with an AoE attack into some light attacks that killed Hulkenberg. Fortunately, on my next turn, I broke the shell that dropped down the heart and gave me 1 free turn to attack. Once my turn ended, they stood up, we see the inside of their shell with frogs in it, and they now materialize armored goblins. With the gimmick here being you have to kill them in a single turn or else they'll use Ambush Assault and Almighty Attack so they don't gain an extra turn. But with their shell recovered, Luigi stood no chance and just kinda died. After learning the boss was weak to strike, I adjusted my skills so both Stroll and Hulkenberg could smash the shell's weakness, allowing me to break the shell in just a single turn. Luigi was now focusing on healing to maximize the damage of Perfect Punch. Once the boss recovered, I defended as I didn't think I could kill the assailants. They then restored the shell, and by focusing it down, I could take it down in a single turn again, but I also chose to use Fire Magic and an AoE damage item to weaken the right hand. Next turn, they recovered and summoned the assailants, which thanks to Gallica were dropped to low HP, so I could dispatch both them, the right hand, and even get some chip damage on the left hand. With the right hand gone, the shell only recovered up to half of its max HP, so it was easy to break the left hand, smash the shell, and deal major damage with some big strong punches. While we couldn't defeat them right now, they fortunately were on low enough health that I could kill them by using some flat damage items. With the day saved, we could return to the inn, sleep, and we now had 8 days to do something. At first, I spent my time with Stroll and Hulkenberg, with Hulkenberg's rank 2 ability being pretty good, as it gives her a chance to protect Luigi if his weakness is struck, denying the enemy an extra turn, so it seemed pretty good. Additionally, I decided to complete Brigitte's quest by heading to this goblin dungeon, and once I made it to the end there was a boss fight, where I used the Jump Thrust Synthesis with Hulkenberg and Luigi to deal good damage and lower defense. Once they got a turn, they dealt massive damage with an AoE, but before they could kill anyone, they just missed. Then after I healed, they missed again, and since they didn't attack on the turn after that, it was pretty easy to finish them off. So once we returned to Grand Tread, I gained Brigitte as a follower, and picked up the Merchant Archetype. In a few days, I then headed off to the desert to hunt a bounty monster who was really easy with their mediocre damage output and a party full of mages to punish their ice weakness. Shortly after this, we arrived on the day of the Sanctus announcement. There, they announced the Tournament of the Throne, a 3-stage tournament to showcase the power of anyone who desires to become king. For the first round, they wanted to test to see who could defeat the strongest monster. So in order to get close to Luis, we entered the tournament and decided to go for a man named Heisme. There now was like this opening ceremony where they announced who was participating in the tournament, like Evil Churchman, Evil Churchman's henchman, who was bold, Edgy Guy, Shulk Xenoblade, Not Maximilian Pegasus, some generic other guys, and of course, Luigi. Our ride, arranged by Hulkenberg, now arrives, we hop on it, and head to our destination. The pilot is now introduced as Nurus, and we now had 3 days to spend doing activities, like reading a book, talking to Stroll, doing that again, finding a big red tree, so it wasn't anything important. However, we ended up encountering a battle between 2 gauntlet runners and decided to help Gladel, who was affiliated with Luis, to hopefully get introduced to him, which initiates a fight against Boldman, who we can't directly strike. Fortunately, the fight is quite easy as Godot doesn't attack. Considering the monks don't do much damage, it was pretty easy to win with Stroll targeting the mages, and Luigi and Hulkenberg striking the ice weakness of the spearman. Once we won the battle, Boldman runs away, we get thanked by a tsundere, and Luis flies in. He now asks us a few questions, Juna says we have Briz, and Luis leaves with the parting words being to prove ourselves worthy of his attention, that we intended to do by helping Barton deal with Heisme. After we get introduced to Joanna, we get told in secret by the guard Lieutenant Morris that we should head to Heisme's location in 5 days, as then there'll be a sand flash, which should put to sleep the sandworms that guard the cave where Heisme is located. We also now unlocked a teleportation. Anyway, since we had 3 days to do whatever, I picked up a bounty for a Goblin King and rode over to its location. First, we had some easy encounters with these mage enemies that eventually lured out the king, starting a fight that was actually kinda hard. As there's 5 enemies, their attack gets buffed immediately and they deal pretty high damage. Now, I died a few times here, with my plan being to take out 3 goblins and then begin focusing the king, who can occasionally sort of waste turns using buffing skills. So once 2 enemies remained, it was not that difficult to stay alive and gradually fire off attacks to take down the king. Then, after a couple turns, I managed to recover enough health to safely finish off the final goblin so we could hand in the bounty. I spent my remaining 2 days preparing by increasing my follower ranks, so now we rode off to find Heisme. But before we got there, we ran into Katharina, who was a candidate to be the next king, so she challenged us to an easy battle, where she missed her second attack so she didn't really do much damage. Then with some lucky crits, we killed her before she could act again. With her bond rank increased to rank 2, we proceeded into the sandworm's lair, where a sandworm human appeared and a boss fight began, where I pretty much just used a bunch of gold attacks with Stroll for easy solid damage. The worm's bites were not all that powerful, and their sandstorm is an almighty attack, so this fight was easy to survive, and easy to end with Stroll's high damage. The worm now swallows us, and we had to escape from the inside, with there being a time limit of 15 minutes, which is extremely generous, but I still died once in here. To this fish guy, who max buffs evasion and lowers our accuracy. Surprisingly, I was actually lucky enough to land a few attacks on the fish's fire weakness, but now they used Frenzy and both Stroll and Hulkenberg got knocked out. I was pretty sure 2 fire attacks could secure me the kill now, but I missed and died. Now what's annoying about dying here is the game is usually very generous with its autosaves. Like if you die to a normal encounter, it usually reloads you on your most recently obtained item. But here they reload you at the very start of this area, so I had to spend like close to 10 minutes sluggishly running through the swamp area just to have another attempt at this fish guy, who thanks to their accuracy and evasion buffs and debuffs is pretty much just RNG if you hit them, since at this point in the game you are fairly unlikely to have a move that removes buffs. So I had to make do with evasion debuff items to increase my chance to hit, and this time they were pretty easy as they don't actually have that much HP. After picking up the remaining treasure, I reached the end of this area that was guarded by this worm guy. Since my damage was pretty high, I didn't have much trouble here. On their first turn, they just summoned 2 normal enemies, who by keeping up a strong offense, I dispatched one of them, then we took an almighty attack and dodged a fire breath, ending their turn, giving me a prime opportunity to take out the worm, and alone the blood guy was easy, clearing the way to our escape route, and once out of the worm, Heisme's cave was just nearby. But because of the bad weather recommended by Morris, striking the enemy's weaknesses here will not give us an extra turn. Luckily, there wasn't many enemies here, and we swiftly found Heisme, initiating a battle where he uses these clones that at first I didn't see the trick behind them. Despite that, this fight was very easy as Heisme just doesn't ever strike to game over you, so while he did kill Hulkenberg and Stroll, he then stopped doing anything, not even resummoning his clones, making it easy to attack him until he smoke bombs to escape. We now looked through his belongings and concluded he may not have been the man he was made out to be. Obviously, we now use our trusty frying pan to lure Heisme out, initiating another fight where after staring at Heisme for a while, I finally figured out the trick behind his clones, which is the shadow appears only for the real one. This fight opens with a message saying Heisme isn't trying to kill us, so I don't know if it's actually possible to lose this fight. Even if it is possible to lose, I had no trouble here, and while the accuracy drops and occasional forgets with dark swords were a little annoying, I defeated him with relative ease by firing off gold attacks. After the battle, Heisme refutes any claims that he's kidnapped anyone and suggests he's been framed. So we capture him, head back to town, then question Barton on the next day, with Morris giving a suspicious response. That combined with the evidence that there were no kidnappings yesterday despite Heisme being tied up, and none of the guards saw a figure enter or leave the village, suggested the crime was an inside job, probably by Morris himself. So later on, we discussed this with Barton, with him directing us to an underground tunnel where we found our culprit with Morris, who releases the hounds and criticizes Heisme, causing him to awaken to the thief archetype, and we enter combat. Here I used gold attacks, fire spells, and a dark sword to kill one enemy and inflict forget on another, nullifying 2 of the incoming attacks, setting me up to inflict forget on the second enemy, making it easy to live through yet another round. Then I ended the battle. With some children rescued, we left that place for now, unlocked the thief archetype from Heisme, and we now had 12 days to apprehend the true culprit under the castle. First things first, I headed off to the abandoned tomb for Alonso's quest, On the journey, we fought a demo man for an unnoteworthy fight. Once I reach the tomb, I get fascinated by a wall, fight this game's mimic enemies, and stumble upon the main boss here, a bigger reskin of the treasure enemies. Somehow this guy is like easier than the regular enemy mimics. They have the same weakness as them, along with a gimmick where if you use a gold attack from the merchant class, they lose every other turn, which pretty much just means they attack once. However, they actually had a way to sort of bypass the gold attack strat, as they actually put Stroll asleep, who couldn't recover, so I couldn't actually use gold attack, permitting them to act as normal and actually deal really high damage, so I had to try again. And on this try, I killed them in 2 turns and they only attacked me once. With a newly obtained key we picked up, we found the ring we were looking for, and for some reason during this cutscene the door just closes behind us and then reopens when we gain control of Luigi, which is odd. Once we return to town, we talked with Cuculus, who reveals his name as Alonso, we shake his hand and unlock the Faker archetype. Now, because I had a quest there, I headed back to the mausoleum in the royal capital, as now I could proceed further inside there, to find that I'm apparently overleveled and I didn't have to fight a single enemy here. As it turns out, the boss here was easy too. They were literally just a lower level version of a regular enemy I found in the last dungeon. For this fight, my damage was good enough that the skeletons were easy to take down. The boss then hexed us and only attacked 1 time, making it quite simple to win. Finally, I was done for the side content for now and decided I was ready to continue the story by heading back into the castle, where suddenly the lights turn off and a sight of a fearsome big black boy drifts across the outside of the bars. After that, we could proceed deeper into the castle, with the area overall being very easy, as I was apparently overleveled and could swiftly take out most enemies with just my out of battle attacks. Although there was one enemy here who was pretty tough, as once we encounter Morris, he calls out the big baby and we're given a choice to sneak past them or fight them in a direct confrontation. During this fight, I couldn't find any weaknesses and now they acted. By first doing nothing, I think, then they used Shadow Shockwave to deal huge damage, then they followed this up by staring to daze us and used their remaining turns to destroy us with powerful Shadow Shockwaves, which seemed close to impossible to survive, but I came up with a plan to overcome this. That was to use accuracy debuffs to maximize my chances to dodge, as if they missed just 1 target with their AoE, they tried to daze us and not attack again. To improve my chances of survival further, I also maxed out an attack debuff and pretty much kept everyone in the back row, using spells with Luigi for damage that I increased by also stacking up a defense debuff. Since they usually missed with this strat, I just had to keep my team healed for a fairly easy win, forcing them to run away, and we were rewarded with basically nothing. A little further in, we fought this guy again and just did the exact same strat as last time for a pretty easy win. In the area after that, I had to drain the water, and after doing that, I climbed up a ladder where we were now chased by the evil baby man and finally confronted Morris. But he activates the classic Scooby-Doo trap hole and we end up getting captured. Fortunately, Gallica can just fly out and rescue us, so we could rescue everyone else, with each party member rescued unleashing a progressively more powerful enemy. And the final one I actually had to fight and not just kill in the overworld, but they were still easy and didn't even get a chance to attack me. So we escaped there, then discovered a room filled with child toys and a torn up portrait of Joanna. Behind the nearby door was the one responsible for the children going missing, the big baby, but this time they aren't just black. Eventually, a battle now begins. Okay, like this fight is really easy. It's literally just an easier version of the last 2 times we fought this guy. They have 2 fewer turn crystals and primarily use almighty attacks like the Deafening Dim and Eager Bite that don't hit our weaknesses. They also don't use the big AoE stomp attack very frequently, so I never really came close to dying as long as I fully debuffed both their attack and accuracy. Overall, this fight is just an easier version of our last 2 encounters with it, so it's pretty unnoteworthy. With the baby defeated, Heismay caused Joanna to come to her senses and agree to confess her crimes to prove our accomplishment for the Tournament of the Throne. Before we could leave for there, we had to wait 6 days. with Barton being a new follower we can gain whose archetype seemed pretty good since it specializes in full party buffs. Before the deadline, I had a bounty in this cave to kill these 2 rockworms, who got 2 whole turns to attack, where on both turns they did very little and then died. Once we reached the deadline, we set off for Browhaven, and on the way we meet a familiar face in a battle, who thanks to Neuros's follower ability took considerable damage. Then after abusing her fire weakness, she beat the life out of Hulkenberg, then we defeated her, increasing her follower rank. Shortly after this, we finally arrived at Browhaven. Here our first objective was to find an inn, fall asleep, and then make our way to the Tournament of the Throne, where the various competitors showcased their achievements, while when it came to our turn, we arrived with a confession from Joanna, who ends up getting killed by Evil Churchman, which impressed Luis, so we were sent an invitation to meet his subordinates at Nightprowler. After testing us, they led us to Luis's Gauntlet Runner, where the big man himself accepts us into his ranks and tells us about a soiree on August 13th, where we'll make our debut. While we did this, Gallica actually sneaked off and discovered the location of the potential cure for the prince's curse. However, to pick it up, we needed to secure a route to Luis's quarters in time for the soiree when we'd sneak in. First things first, I increased a few followers' ranks, then journeyed off to the north to complete a few side objectives. Our first stop was the Tomb of Lament, home to many mimics, these big guys, but what we were looking for was this treasure to rank up Neuros, and the boss was just a reskinned enemy and boss from before. To beat them, I just used my light attacks to strike its weakness, and they in turn responded by using Soul Cry to summon, and the summoned enemy healed the boss to full. By firing off light and wind attacks, Hulkenberg managed to act twice, so she could use the Knight's Proclamation to bait the enemies into attacking her, while she defended. Now, it was easy to dispatch the Chimera, leaving the boss, who was much easier than most enemies, as they only had 1 turn crystal that they used to execute Soul Cry, which doesn't allow them to gain extra turns by hitting my weaknesses, making them pretty easy to defeat. So we could leave and head further north to fight Roger, who wasn't hard in the slightest. I just focused the supporters, who didn't deal much damage, and won on like my 5th turn. But that was not our only encounter with a rival candidate, as before we reached the upcoming tower, we ran into Katharina, who has a few new attacks this time around, but by lowering her attack, she wasn't really that hard. I could just heal up most of the damage she dealt, and my fire attacks could outdamage her own healing, so I had no problems. After ranking her up to rank 4, we proceeded on to the Forsaken Tower, an area filled with smaller reskins of a boss we fought before, exploding octopi, and big strong Orgas. Against the boss here, I utilized a newish plan, as I had Heise May on Assassin, so he could use Lurking Nightblade, an attack that not only struck their weakness, but also lowered accuracy and evasion, so I could easily just spam this move and easily maintain a maxed out accuracy debuff, which makes it very likely for at least 1 party member to dodge their big AoE attack and instantly end their turn. Despite the boss's immense power, by dodging we could stay alive, unleash some dark attacks, and eventually be victorious. At the top of the tower was a suspicious open area that definitely isn't going to be a boss arena later on. After returning to the Gauntlet Runner, I now ventured south towards an opposing Gauntlet Runner, starting a battle against Lena. Lena somehow missed on her 2 attack opportunities, and I killed her effortlessly in 3 turns, clearing us a path to Gracia Forest, an extremely unnoteworthy area that also contains a very unnoteworthy boss. They aren't even particularly easy, they just use moderately strong physical attacks and an occasional AoE, but they died in 3 turns, so it was just kind of a standard easy fight. After that, I could finally return to Browhaven. Then, after completing various requests, I made a few preparations and was finally prepared to enter Luis's Gauntlet Runner. Inside, we proceeded to the crew quarters, where Stroll distracted a guard so we could sneak on past to a stealth segment, which is about as fun as it sounds. Once all the guards were taken out, we regrouped with everyone else and confronted Zomph, with the gimmick here being you need to win in 3 turns or less. Thanks to the information from the informant, I knew this guy was vulnerable to both poison and paralysis. However, unlike the playable characters, I think the enemies can't suffer from multiple ailments, so I wasted Stroll's turn here. Fortunately, paralysis skipped the sergeant's turn, then with Lurking Nightblades to decrease accuracy, we dodged their next attack and killed him before they could strike again. With the keycard, we headed up to the next floor, where we were given a choice to fight 2 different opponents, but in the end, I just fought them both. Before fighting them came another fun-filled stealth segment. First up was this man who tries to daze us, which failed, but their 2 punishing blows were effective and actually killed Stroll. Considering I had a free turn limit, I just reset, and next time I got a dodge to deny their extra action. My plan now was to use Lurking Nightblade to maximize my odds of dodging, which luckily succeeded. Now I could prioritize offense, and I just barely managed to take them out in the time limit. The other boss plays purely defensively, as they just used Tetrakarn, that I dispelled with Tetra Break, allowing me to strike their physical weakness, and then I could repeat this until I won. After this, we head off to the first bridge, use some tricks to split up the soldiers, and fought the final 2 bosses here. Considering there was 2 of them, I was using powerful AoE attacks with Stroll to target both of them, and thanks to their easily exploitable weaknesses, I almost killed one of them on my very first turn. In response, they used a Mage Almighty, a sweeping slash, and killed Stroll with another Mage Almighty. So I had to revive Stroll, heal up, dispatch the mage, and prepare for another enemy turn, which I comfortably survived, and with a huge crit with Gold Attack, I ended the battle just in time to win. With our newly obtained keycard, we could access Luis's quarters, so all we had to do now was waste 7 days of time to sneak in on the day of the soiree. During this week, I maxed Stroll's rank, which rewards me with the very vague reward of acquiring a new heroic embodiment. Since this was my first playthrough, I had no idea what this did, and I would not find out for like another 20 hours. Anyway, for other options to spend my time, I found the arena that for ranking up in, I could pick up some pretty useful accessories, so I spent some time there. Then after that, I reached a high enough rank with Barton to unlock a quest where we headed off to rematch this boss from earlier in the game, which is a quite noteworthy fight, as this enemy is level 60 compared to our level like 35. Because of this level difference, our damage is effectively halved, so they are really tanky, and their damage was pretty high too, so I employed my useful strat when dealing with a powerful enemy of just aiming to fully debuff all of its stats. Fortunately, this boss doesn't really have a large variety of attacks it uses. It has Sandstorm, which is an AoE Almighty attack that we can just dodge. Then they have Feral Bite that can hit our weaknesses, as well as this move that is an AoE, so we can dodge it to deny them the extra turn. Now, despite the fact that this fight took me like 10 minutes to beat, with Barton's supportive buffs, it was pretty simple to survive, and I won on my first try without any issues. Next was the day of the soiree, so we headed over, got welcomed into Luis's ranks, and sneaked away onto his Gauntlet Runner. Unfortunately, they seemed to have a new security system in place, so we couldn't access Luis's quarters. Then suddenly, the entire runner flipped sideways, and we now have to surf across it to reach Luis's quarters, where I died because the tutorial for this part is very bad. It literally says, do this and don't do this, and it's literally just the same image. So I understandably didn't understand what I was supposed to do, so I died. After then, learning from experience, we reached Luis's quarters and found what we were looking for. Juna now shows up, does this for some reason, then she realizes that she's actually on our side, then Gladel appears and said he's going to snitch on us. So Juna attempts to be a decoy, but we instead attempt to rescue her by confronting Gladel on the outside of the Gauntlet Runner, where he calls out Big Dog to rend us twice. Since he held Juna as a hostage, we couldn't attack him, but he later decides to let her go. She then awakens to her Archetype, and we begin a 2 versus 2 battle. That's quite easy, as by abusing the Hound's wind weakness, we almost killed them in a single turn. In return, Gladel just used some supportive abilities, so we were only attacked once, making it simple to finish off the Hound. With just a single action and mediocre damage output, Gladel was nothing special and died swiftly to some light magic. Gladel now dies in the cutscene, we give a convincing explanation to Luis, then with Juna we head back to Grand Trad to ask her sister if she can cure the King's curse, that she can't, so now our new objective was to find a way to bypass the King's magic and kill Luis. The solution to this was practically given to us on just the next day, as they announced the second stage of the Tournament of the Throne, where we would have to gather a divine relic. That Luis asked us to pick up one in particular, Dracodius, a lance capable of piercing the king's magic that he plans to use on Thordan. After receiving important information on the lance by this guy who has a chest piece as a helmet, Norris upgraded the Gauntlet Runner to travel across the sea, and with Fidelio and Basilio to keep watch on us, we set sail for Virga Island to find Dracodius. Unfortunately, the journey there wasn't as simple as it seemed, as in the ocean was home to a octopus human monster, causing a battle to begin. Since I didn't expect this fight, I had a pretty poor team composition, as I lacked a good AoE user to cut down the tentacles, meaning random strike just kinda destroyed me. On my next try, I switched out Juna for Stroll to use Raging Slash, which had a high chance to crit at least once, granting us an extra turn. With a few more attacks, we actually cut all of the tentacles on the first turn, which supposedly weakened them, but they still hit really hard, killed Stroll, and dropped everyone to pretty low HP. So I had to revive Stroll, then use Meditate to heal, and Lurking Nightblade to lower accuracy, resulting in a lucky dodge giving us an opportunity to heal up and deal good damage with electric attacks and debuff them even further. Shortly after this, they recovered, but slicing down the tentacles again was easy thanks to Stroll, and since they were debuffed, their attacks were no longer scary. As a result, the boss was quite unchallenging now, so after eliminating them, we picked up an accessory from Fidelio and could finally arrive at the Mustari village. However, on arrival we find a priestess and end up getting captured by some guards, with Fidelio and Basilio sneaking away and coming back to rescue us. Before escaping the island, we found the Knight Chestpiece Man again, asking for our assistance to help his sister, who after tending to his wounds at an inn, requests us yet again to head to the temple to save his sister from sacrificing herself after Adeni promised us the lance Dracodius as a reward. I picked up some equipment and ventured north to the temple. Unfortunately, a big tree blocks the way in, and Fidelio's wounds from earlier had yet to recover, so we had to leave and now find a way to make it past the big tree, which just required us to pick up a few items to craft a special kind of water. Having said that, I didn't immediately head over there, as Juna gave me a quest that if I completed, I'd gain her as a follower, so heading off to this cave seemed like a decent plan, especially considering the boss here isn't a challenge. With Juna and Luigi's fire attacks, they died in like 3 turns, and on their turn, thanks to some accuracy debuffs, they didn't really do much, so I ranked Juna up to rank 1. Now, I went on a perilous journey to the large tower to the far south of the map that seemed to always have bad weather, making enemy encounters much harder, which combined with this tower's enemies being a much higher level than me, caused me to have to leave, as the boss here was insanely powerful, and since I wasn't paying attention to their gimmick where they gain 4 more turns if someone is in the front row. Anyway, other than the bounty near Grand Trad, there wasn't really anything else to do but set off for the Dragon Temple. First, we had to make it past this tree, who unsurprisingly ends up being a boss. What's cool about this guy is he didn't even attack me once, as on their only turn they used Soul Cry, tried to recover some health, and maxed out their attack. After landing the killing blow, we enter inside and eventually found this room. That is home to a puzzle where I don't actually get what you're supposed to do. I think it's supposed to be like Lost Woods in Ocarina of Time, but the way I solved it is I just walked down the stairs, and if I noticed the screen turned black, I'd turn around, and I just repeated that until I've reached the bottom, where we encounter Yufa, the priestess we were looking for, who agrees to lead us to the altar where we can pick up Dracodius. In the next area, we can look out the window to find like a big ocean. Now, further into this area, they tease us with this optional boss fight that I obviously decided to fight. The problem with this guy is they act first, then attempt to deal massive damage to everyone with Raging Edge, and on my first try, I just immediately died here. Luckily, on attempt 2, Heist made dodge to end their turn immediately, but next turn I knew I wasn't going to be as lucky, so I had to lower both their attack and evasion if I even wanted to stand a chance here. Unfortunately, that was not nearly enough. Next time, I managed to fully stack up some attack and accuracy debuffs, giving me a high chance to survive the enemy's turn. Additionally, with the electric weakness I uncovered, it was easy to maintain a strong offense while keeping my team healed and maintaining a maxed out defense buff. The one problem I had with this guy is when they were dropped to low HP, they actually started to use Breath of Battle to significantly increase both attack and defense. Thankfully, I could just barely kill them before they could act again. For beating that boss, I got like trolled, as they don't really reward you with anything, and Yufa says we didn't actually kill the true body, so fighting these guys that keep showing up was pretty much pointless. Or was it? I thought to myself, so I fought another, which instead of fighting fairly, I pulled out my secret weapon, Tetracon, blocking all damage from the boss, repelling it back, and consistently ending their turn, consequently making the fight a complete joke. But now I have like no MP, so the remainder of the dungeon was kind of frustrating. Eventually I cornered the real version of this boss, who I think is just the same fight as last time, so I just did the exact same thing as before and won on my first try, clearing out the path forward so we could activate this elevator leading to the final area here with a few optional chests, but at the end was the innermost altar, where we finally found the lance, a dragon, and a guy on the dragon's back. With a tail swipe, the dragon knocks us to the ground, then the dragon stands still and does nothing for like a minute, while Yufa awakens to the summoner archetype to help in the boss battle. At first here, I used Yufa's synergy attack that decreases attack by 3 ranks, and could also strike the Homo Margo's weakness. Heismei now debuffed hit and defense, while Juna buffed our defense, and Luigi and Yufa fired off wind magic. After they slap us with a tail swipe, they buffed attack, then removed all of their debuffs. So we applied those debuffs again, which in turn made them use Roar to lower all of our stats and remove their debuffs again. And because of the debuffs, we missed twice, ending our turn, and inflicting us with many ailments from the dragon's attacks. After using a few more wind attacks, they used Plundering Life to restore HP, but from here on out the process remains mostly the same. I just continuously fired off wind magic, lowered their attack, and I healed when it was necessary, resulting in us defeating the human. Then alone the dragon doesn't really do much, so we won. The dragon's power now gets returned to Dracodius, powering it up, but unfortunately the human escaped, heading for the village, so we had to chase after it, where it caused some chaos, but the locals were evacuated by Basilio and Fidelio, leaving the job of killing it up to us. This was not very difficult. They don't really use AoE attacks or deal much damage. Additionally, they usually waste their turns removing our buffs, removing their debuffs, or the gimmick for this fight where they change affinity, making them, I think, immune to every element except the opposite one to their affinity. But I just kind of ignored this gimmick by using Juna to implant a fire weakness, making an easy fight even easier. With the village saved, we headed back to the Gauntlet Runner to discuss a plan on how to use Dracodius to kill Luis, with the plan being to create a fake duplicate lance, then hand Luis the fake, then use the real lance to kill him while he's distracted. But first, Neuros had to make the duplicate, so we had to wait another 15 days. Right now, I picked up Yufa's quest to unlock her as a follower, then after asking Adeni to change the weather, we journeyed to the Land of Ceremony, home to perhaps the easiest boss fight thus far, where they don't do any damage and die on literally turn 3. Once I returned back to the village, I increased a few follower ranks, then headed off to fight a bounty boss with this big Cyclops guy, where I used AoE wind magic to decimate the mage goblins, causing the Cyclops to act 4 times, where they pretty much just killed Stroll and charged, guaranteeing me the win on the subsequent turn. After this, I journeyed all the way back to the Spire of Blind Thief for a rematch against this boss, who with the improved weather I found to be quite easy, as I dealt like half of their max HP as damage on turn 1. On their only chance to act, they used Heat Riser and 2 single target attacks. With little to no effort, I won. From there, I found the obvious boss arena, then headed back to the village to increase my bond ranks for the remaining days until departure. Before leaving, we used teleportation to send Rella to Etria to fully check if Fidelio had recovered. Then on the final night, there was like a celebration, and we had a choice of one party member to spend our time with. Now we departed to the Wanderer city of Altabury Heights. Once there, we handed the fake Dracodius over to Luis and found an inn. After figuring out a plan to assassinate Luis, we headed off to the Opera House on the next day, where to find a key to reach the roof, we had to complete a mini trade quest. Once that was done, Luigi and Yufa climbed to the top of the Opera House, where there were a few battles on the way which were pretty unnoteworthy. Once they reached the top, Luigi dropped onto the chandelier, lined up the shot, threw the lance, and it pierced Luis. Unfortunately, however, Yufa was unable to recover the lance, so they swiftly escaped to the roof to regroup with the others. Then, a familiar face showed up with the lance, with the only option now being to challenge Luis to a duel, as then we could bypass the king's magic, and after accepting, a battle began. At first, I tried to debuff him and ended my turn using Holy Knight Proclamation, a new ability that's pretty good as it combines a taunt effect with a defend, which was a combo we were using earlier in the run, but now it's just in one skill. Anyway, Luis always begins his turn using Soul Cry, granting 2 more turns, then he just attacked, used Royal Slash, and lowered Hulkenberg's stats. I now further lowered Luis's stats while dealing okay damage. What's noteworthy about this fight is Luis can actually bypass the taunt effect from Holy Knight's Proclamation to still strike Luigi. So from here on out, I stopped using that, and after buffing my defense, I had little to no problems with this fight. Luis doesn't use any other attacks than the ones we've seen, so I slowly killed him, initiating a cutscene where we land the killing blow with Dracodius, dropping him down from the roof in front of the entire audience of the Opera House. Then, after claiming Dracodius as our offering for the Tournament of the Throne, we returned to the inn and realized that killing Luis may have been a mistake, as he was actually framed for cursing the prince, and our suspicions led us to believe it was Forden. So we had to at least try to take Dracodius back, as with it in his hands, he could kill anyone he wanted, but he wouldn't let us take it back, and with the crowd support, try to kill us. However, a certain man appeared to return from the dead, armed with a real Dracodius, using it to kill Forden, and after that, it was revealed that Zorba actually survived jumping off the building and used his powers to effectively revive Luis. From our prior interaction, Luis now knows the prince is still alive and threatens us. Then he aims his lance at an innocent family, prepares to unleash an attack, but is stopped by Fidelio and Basilio. Obviously, Fidelio dies, and the guy who looks suspiciously like a berserker, the only archetype teased in the synthesis menu that we don't currently have, survives. Luis now leaves, and we have to retreat to escape Godot. Here, Basilio awakens to the berserker archetype, then tomorrow, Rella announces herself as a replacement candidate for Forden since he died. Later, Luis shows up and requests the king removes the protection of the king's magic as he possesses a divine relic to pierce its protection. The king now agrees, Luigi announces himself as prince in the actual prince's stead, then Rella talks more and more, and it appears she's using magic to control the people, and she admits that it was her who actually cast the curse on the prince. She now says to meet her at the ruins of the Magic Academy, then grabs a divine relic staff and teleports away. So of course, we decided to chase after her, an easy task thanks to an upgrade to the Gauntlet Runner, allowing it to fly. Once we arrived, she says she wants to test our power, so she summons a dragon thanks to her divine relic, initiating a battle. I don't know if it's just me, but I found this fight to be abnormally hard. Like most bosses up until this point, I beat on like my first or second try, but this guy took me like around 20 tries to beat. The main problem here is Rella uses Court Wall to nullify the next magical attack. Now, unlike Tetra Khan and Makara Khan, I couldn't find an easy way to dispel this, so my best option to continuously strike their fire weakness was to just attack them and lose 2 actions. I didn't really have a choice to use physical attacks as they weren't really doing much damage. And between the boss's debuffs, AoE attacks, and Rella's support to remove debuffs, I found it very difficult to both survive and deal damage. After dying numerous times, I slowly started to piece together a plan to actually make it possible to win here. So at first, I used an item to lower all of the dragon's stats, giving me a decent chance to dodge, and prevent the boss from attacking multiple times in a row. As for my damage, I dealt the most I possibly could on my first turn, as then they were unprotected by Court Wall, so I could deal a little over half of their max HP as damage. Now, we had to survive a turn, which is easier said than done, and since here they debuffed me, I had to use a reset talisman. Basilio now charged, as since he's the only physical damage user I have on this team, it was his job to deal damage if Court Wall was up, and I couldn't risk losing 2 turns to remove it. Anyway, with a little luck, I actually managed to win here. Or so I thought, as this fight has a phase 2. Fortunately, this phase is far easier than the previous phase, as the boss has no way to deal with debuffs and they don't protect themselves with Court Wall. They also have 1 fewer turn and, generally speaking, are much easier to survive despite their new move that increases attack. Considering we can now abuse their fire weakness, now it's much easier to kill them, and I beat this phase on my first try. It was pretty easy. Having witnessed our power, Rella was happy to hand the throne over to us and then spoke about the circumstances relating to the prince's curse, as Forden threatened Rella to place the curse on the prince or else he'll harm Juna. After warning us about the despicable future Louise will bring, she kills herself, and finally, the prince's curse has been lifted. Once we return to the Gauntlet Runner, we hear Louise has challenged us to a duel on September 24th, so now we had to prepare. At first, I head south to fight a rival candidate, Loveless, who for some reason uses magical attacks that do like no damage. Despite this, he still isn't actually a free win, as even with his attack down 3 stages, his slam shatters dealt like 200 damage. So I actually had to attempt this fight again. Knowing it was tough, I made sure to buff my defense, and honestly, the fight wasn't that bad now. So eventually I succeeded. Now I headed back to Montario, and here I decided to finally max out Moore's follower rank. That required me to max out a 3rd tier archetype. I went with Soul Hacker with Luigi, as Emerald Vortex looked pretty strong as it bypasses resistances. With Moore maxed out, everyone gained a nice +3 boost to every stat, and I was pretty sure I was ready to take on another rival candidate with Rudolph. Luckily, my newly acquired Emerald Vortex made this one pretty easy, but towards the end of the fight, Rudolph's Vorpal Blades were actually quite annoying. But it wasn't anything too bad, and we won without issue. Next, I headed off to the snowy forest for a bounty, and what's pretty cool about normal battles now is Emerald Vortex pretty much just kills all weak enemies easily, which is pretty convenient. The boss here was pretty simple too. My AoE wind attacks with Emerald Vortex and Summon Eagle Line just dealt massive damage to both targets, then they wasted their turn not attacking, so after removing the Makarakan effect, I could just defeat them both then and there. My next objective led me to the Tower of Insolence, home to a few high-level enemies, but nothing I couldn't handle. Near the top was a boss fight against a Cyclops that was weak to wind, so you can probably guess how this fight went. But actually, this guy summons a second boss, which could be hard if I wasn't primarily using AoE attacks and AoE debuffs. They did almost kill me though, as when alone they gain 4 extra turns, that they use to charge and deal pretty high damage with Frenzy, nearly killing everyone. Fortunately, my sole survivor could secure the kill, and we could find the obvious boss arena again. By heading northwest, I now stumbled upon Maximilian Pegasus. There's like nothing difficult about this fight, he does like 0 damage, and we just burn him down with fire magic. My priority now was ranking up Alonso, as I really wanted to reach rank 8 to unlock Trickster, which has the incredible ability Debilitate to decrease all enemy stats. Once I maxed him out, it was the perfect time to head off to the volcano to continue advancing Yufa as a follower. Despite being a little underleveled for this area, the enemies weren't particularly noteworthy, mainly because I ranked Katharina up to rank 7, which makes her start the fight by dealing a large percentage of max HP, which makes like these kinda strong enemies pretty easy. Interestingly enough, Katharina can also strike bosses with this attack, which does a lot of damage for free. Anyway, this guy uses an almighty attack with Mage Omniscience, along with some more deadly light and dark spells. Fortunately, he has no way to buff or debuff, so I could just max out my defense and use Warcry to drop his attack and defense. Then with Emerald Vortexes, my damage was pretty high, and when the boss was low on HP, they started to use a new attack that tried to curse me, and they sometimes used this multiple times in a row. It didn't really change anything though, so I just dispatched them. Now, with that labyrinth conquered, it was time to head off to Grand Trad for our final battle versus Louise. Once we arrived, we returned to the inn from the start of the game, and after reconfiguring my party and having a night's sleep, we stepped towards the Grand Cathedral, where Louise arrives in his Gauntlet Runner and a battle begins. I personally think this fight is very anticlimactic. Louise isn't much stronger than when we fought him last time. The only new moves he now has is this AoE attack, and he now infuses his sword with different elements. Both don't actually make the fight much harder, as his AoE attacks were quite likely to miss after I used a few debilitates, and since I'm weak to everything, changing elements just allowed me to use Makarakan to repel the attacks back and instantly end his turn. With Emerald Vortexes, my damage was also way higher than last time, so it wasn't a challenge to drop him below 50% of his max HP, where he now gains 2 more turns. He still doesn't really do much damage, but at least he's trying, I guess. In like 2 minutes, I kill him, and a cutscene begins where he uses evil magic to turn Luigi into a big black creature and says, "Behold Luigi's true form." Luigi now hears a mysterious voice in outer space and returns back to normal. However, the damage was done, as the people now believe Luigi is an imposter, and we're forced to retreat and find the real prince hidden deep in this forest. Unfortunately, the prince actually died to an assassin, but guess what, that doesn't really matter as Luigi was actually the prince all along, sort of, as Luigi is like a magic man with the same soul as him, so they fused together, giving him a wacky new hair color, along with a new personal archetype, the prince, which is a physical leaning supportive class that I didn't really use because Luigi doesn't really have a strength stat. We then spot the intruder and follow him to the woods, where he calls forth the boss from the start of the game, and Luigi is forced to be a prince for this fight. This fight is not very difficult. I just spammed Emerald Vortexes, used Debilitate to minimize the damage I would take, and used Holy Knight Proclamation to redirect their attacks towards a defending Hulkenberg. Considering their low damage, this fight was just kinda easy. After this, we finally maxed out Gallica, unlocking 2 pretty useful archetypes for Luigi. Then, we returned to Grand Trad, where suddenly the people were far angrier than expected, and the sky was also a big scary red color. So we retreated to an inn to be safe, where our best bet to find Luis was to head to the giant palace in the sky, which would be our final deadline. At this point in the game, I had now unlocked a few more archetypes, with them being like the ultimate archetype for each character. They all looked pretty strong, but the main problem is they require the party members to master very specific archetypes to unlock, and since I had no prior knowledge of what archetypes to master, I only unlocked like one of these before beating the game. Anyway, since these are our final 30 days in the game, I now had to make sure to max out my remaining followers. I also wanted to finish every quest in the game, with the most noteworthy 3 we unlocked at this point being the 3 quests relating to revisits to the towers we climbed in the past. There was also some new bounties, and that was what I decided to tackle first. Inside this forest, I just had to kill some snakes for this big guy to appear. With Katharina's assistance, I almost killed this guy on my first turn, but since I was short of the kill, I had to use Holy Knight's Proclamation to take like no damage from their one and only attack before they died. After that, I ended up fighting Jin, who like most enemies at this point in the game, just doesn't really do much damage at all, and the little damage they dealt can easily be mitigated by Holy Knight's Proclamation. So it was just easy. On our next adventure, we were joined by Basilio to help Vinka. This fight is not noteworthy in the slightest. I just fully lowered all of his stats and used Tetrakarn to instantly end Vinka's turn. Basilio and Luigi could focus on offense, and in time Vinka died, which eventually maxed out Basilio. On my journey to the next bounty, I actually maxed out Yufa. As for the next area, it features this teleporting gimmick, which somehow confused me for a few minutes, as I didn't notice the big obvious teleporter in the center of the area that you have to take to reach the boss here. What's crazy about this boss is they don't actually do anything, so as expected, they're easy. Immediately after this, I headed off to the north to face the final bounty boss, who we use AoE attacks on to dispose of their underlings, but they resummoned them and I wasn't able to kill them this time around. Fortunately, they just don't do anything, so with light and fire magic, we were victorious, until a new boss appeared. This fight is a little harder than the last. They have pretty high HP and a few resistances that are kind of annoying, so I was aiming to inflict a fire weakness with Juna, who was now a royal masked dancer. With Debilitate, I managed to drop the boss's accuracy, but their attack and defense were much harder to lower thanks to their frequent use of Breath of Battle. But because they continuously used this move, they only had 1 to 2 turns to deal damage. Where they usually missed thanks to my debuffs, while they were quite durable, their average offense made for a simple fight. Now I actually did some fishing as I wanted to unlock the ultimate dish, the Sublime Spoonful, which is crazy good as it just gives 4 extra turns basically for free. But it is pretty hard to obtain as you have to waste time fishing to pick up the ingredients to make it. Anyway, I now headed off to the Tower of Insolence and started to begin the Trial of the Dragon questline. This area now is actually filled with pretty high level monsters. Fortunately, Precipice of the Abyss just instantly kills most of them in 1 hit. At the top of the tower, the Suspicious Boss Arena is actually home to a big dragon. This guy is immune to every element, but I had a plan to make this fight trivial. First, I debilitated, then implanted a fire weakness, then went for massive damage with Meteor Fall. Thanks to an accessory I picked up, this only costed 1 action, and Luigi's skills were set up to maximize this move's damage. Anyway, after buffing and debuffing, the dragon's turn began. With Miasma Whirl, our max HP was dropped to a meager 300. Then they increased attack twice and attempted to curse us. Because of this curse, Luigi couldn't use Meteor Fall, but I actually didn't want him to do that, as I gave him Hyper to significantly boost his next attack's damage, which now did over 9,000 damage, almost instantly killing the dragon on just the second turn. And with 2 fortunate dodges, I just implanted another fire weakness and just ended the battle with another meteor fall. As a reward for defeating pretty much all of these dragons, you get a piece of armor that's pretty good, but I can't use it because it makes me immune to fire. Next, I journeyed off to the Forsaken Tower, which is pretty much the same thing: high level normal enemies that are easy, an Eggman guarding the top, and a dragon at the very end. To start this fight, I pretty much did the same thing as last time. I used Debilitate with Heismay, Hyper with Luigi, implanted a Fire Weakness with Juna, then ended the turn with a new Synthesis ability, Dynast Formation, that fully buffs all party members, with the only downside being I had to equip this accessory to make it cost 1 turn. With our buffs, we had an easy time avoiding the dragon's assault, setting us up to deal massive damage with Luigi twice. Thanks to a miss and Hulkenberg's passive, the dragon's turn was uneventful, so it was pretty easy to win now and end the battle. With another piece of armor that I can't use added to my possession, I headed off to the final tower to fight the final remaining dragon. For this dragon, they give you really bad advice of saying you need to use repelling magic, but using the magic slowed me down and actually used up my implanted fire weakness, making it hard to find a good opportunity to nuke them with Meteor Fall. So they used Bewitching Blaze to charm my team, which I couldn't really recover from, and I just died on the next turn as they instantly killed me with Burn Down. Next time, I just ignored the terrible advice I was given and just used my usual plan of setting Luigi up to deal around 10,000 damage. Then I used Holy Knight's Proclamation to survive their attacks, then just ended the battle with a Meteor Fall. After the battle, the fairy who's been challenging us to fight the dragons says since we've now defeated all 3 dragons, a 4th dragon had now appeared at the Dragon Temple. So I sailed north of Etria to reach the temple, where Edeni warns us about what's inside, along with the fairy from before, but we still decide to head inside, and strangely enough, there is like no dungeon here, you can just teleport to the end, and at the end of this room, we find the dragon, who takes the form of a Shadow Luigi, and we begin a surprisingly pretty easy fight. To start the fight off, I do the usual, while Elegy of the Soul switches to the Seeker archetype, then uses various buffs and ends the turn with Emerald Vortex for mediocre damage. Thanks to Gallica, on this turn I had 2 more actions, so I could deal some good damage, set up for the next turn, and use Holy Knight's Proclamation. Shadow Luigi now switches to the Warrior, uses 2 buffing skills, and then 2 attacks with the second one being quite strong. After debilitating, I hoped to deal big damage with Meteor Fall, but I missed, and I had to just heal. Switching to the Knight archetype, Elegy of the Soul buffs defense, and then uses 3 attacks which are all blocked by a defending Hulkenberg. I now had to reapply a few of my buffs, and I didn't have an opportunity to strike. Once they switched to the Thief, disaster struck, as they made himself immune to physical strikes, inflicted rage on Heismay and Luigi, then I luckily dodged the AoE to end their turn. Unfortunately now, both Heismay and Luigi attacked using up 3 of my turns, so I decided this was a great time to use a Sublime Spoonful to gain 4 more turns, that I used to recover from the rage, debilitate, and then deal 10,000 damage. On Masked Dancer, the boss fortunately did very little, as they used an AoE fire attack that missed, then did literally nothing. On this turn, I had hoped to end the battle, but unfortunately I was just short of the kill, so Elegy of the Soul acted once more and used a terrifying Hero's Cry to gain 4 extra turns. Fortunately, they used these turns to fire off AoEs that usually missed, using up twice the turns as normal, making it possible to survive. Then I could fire off 1 final Meteor Fall to end the battle. They now disappear, and we were rewarded with Dragon's Legacy, a sword that I'm never going to use. Since I have literally done like everything now, the only thing left to do was fly over to the Skybound Avatar to finally face Luis. Inside was this area where the voices of the people wouldn't let us proceed up the stairs, so we had to head straight ahead to find this guy again. Well, we had to find the real guy in this maze area, then fight them again. As you might expect, this fight was not very hard. I simply put deal far more damage than they expect for this point in the game, and I almost killed them on my first turn. After they literally dealt no damage, I defeated them, but that was not nearly enough, as I had to head over to the left side of the maze to fight a second version of this boss, who I actually killed on my first turn, clearing the path forward to this Chimera guy, who literally dealt 0 damage and died to like 2 attacks. With them defeated, we could break the nearby crystal that causes the public to come to their senses, so we could proceed up the stairs to a new area where we had a choice to head head either left or right. At first, I explored the left room that held a weird door gimmick where you teleport around. Once I reached the end, there was a boss fight, and I'm going to be entirely honest with you. Almost every boss fight from this point onward goes pretty much the exact same way, where I set up to one-shot them and it usually works. In the situations where they actually get a turn, they usually do very little, so most bosses from here on out are easy like this one. With this crystal broken, we returned to the prior room and this time headed off to the right, where the gimmick was we were on a time limit to break these crystals that spawned enemies. Now, I imagine this is really annoying if you aren't high enough level to kill these guys in the overworld. Fortunately, I am, because I did the dragon side quests. After breaking all the crystals, we open the way to an unnoteworthy boss fight that after destroying, we could return to the previous room and could head up the stairs that eventually led to us encountering Zorba, who Luis used his magic on to turn him into like a monster man, and now we fight him. Looking at how spooky Zorba looks, you'd think he would be kind of tough, but he isn't. He doesn't do much damage and doesn't have much health. After a long 4-turn battle, he died, and he now just commits suicide by full damage. Now we've reached the end of the dungeon and we finally confronted Luis, who rants about his motivations and his plans to use the Royal Scepter to essentially just turn everyone into monsters, and the few that survive this are the ones he deems worthy, like our group. So he actually gives us a choice to join him, which we refuse. Then he just takes the rod, then retreats to the evil redness in the sky that right now we can't enter, and after regrouping at the inn in Grand Trad, we decide our best bet to confront Luis is to fly there one day before the day of the hero where the new king is crowned, which was in 6 days, and at this point in the game there isn't really anything I can do, so I just went fishing for 6 days. The day before we had to leave, we could speak with every single one of our followers, then after a night's rest, we hopped on the Gauntlet Runner and ventured towards the Tyrant Star, the final dungeon for this game, which isn't very good. Okay, so the gimmick with this area is there's nothing here, and you can take these floating platforms which send you to a crystal where you get ambushed by a reskin of one of the previous major boss fights. And I'm gonna say this now, none of them are hard, they're pretty much just a waste of time. I pretty much could just use my usual setup to kill most of them within 3 turns. The only one I had the slightest trouble with was the one we encountered in Etria, primarily because they remove our buffs and debuffs, and when they change affinity, it actually removes the fire weakness I inflicted with Juna. Fortunately, this guy doesn't do much damage, so their good survivability doesn't really do much other than being annoying. For beating these bosses, we were actually rewarded with some really strong weapons, and on the topic of weapons, while I was in this area, I actually managed to reach 100% mastery with Luigi, which rewarded me with a pretty strong sword for Prince that makes everyone immune to anxiety. Anyway, once all the repeat bosses were killed, we could finally reach the end of the final area to confront Luis. After he transforms, it was time to fight him, and they really let you know this isn't the final boss, as he literally has a generic boss theme. For this fight, I had equipped Heismay with an accessory that immediately ends the enemy's turn if they miss, and on Luis's first 2 attacks, he did just that. So his damage was pretty bad, while mine was pretty good. On his 3rd turn, he removed his debuffs, then used an AoE attack that missed again, so I just killed him. He now escapes to his Gauntlet Runner, so we have to chase after him alone while everyone else fights off some humans. Here, Luis does a Super Saiyan transformation scream to return to his previous form, then use some magic to turn Luigi into a big black creature. But to stop this, he rips out his heart like an idiot and almost dies. Fortunately, he's saved by Moore, who says the old world is fiction, check out the new cooler one, but it turns out he was lying and this one's actually fake, but he believes it to be the ideal world and wants to make us accept that, so he fights us. This fight we have to do both solo and on the Prince class for some reason. Fortunately, it's quite easy, as I used a Sublime Spoonful to act 4 more times, where I fully buffed with Heroes Proving and almost won the battle with Emerald Vortexes. Then after dodging one of Moore's Seeker Gales, I won. This world now fades away, we return to Academia, and I made a few final preparations before leaving. After Luigi woke up, Luis transformed into a big guy, and now the final battle begins. I actually had a slightly different plan than usual here, as Luigi was on print, so he could give us an extra turn from this accessory I picked up. At first, I used Hyper, then Debilitated, then I inflicted a Fire weakness, buffed everyone, and used Emerald Vortex for decent AoE damage. I now get extremely disappointed as they use Heat Riser and attack for very low damage. Luis ends his turn with New Dawn Sacrifice, which is a move that I have no clue what it even does. When Luis uses Heat Riser, it actually affects all of the heads, so I was actually getting pretty good value out of Ruin's Flameflower, an AoE attack that removes buffs. And this attack and Emerald Vortexes were my main sources of damage for this fight. As for Luis, he still doesn't really do much damage, but he did strike a weakness and use Terror Overflowing, a move that I don't even know what it does. From here on out, nothing noteworthy really happened. I just fired off my AoE attacks, Luis missed his, and eventually I defeated all 3 targets in a single attack, forcing Luis to change form, and now the real final battle begins. My plan for this fight was pretty much the same as the last one, but first I had to recover my MP. On Luis's first turn, he used High Pressure to remove one of my turns. Next, he used Cold World, which doesn't do anything thanks to Luigi's sword. Then he removed his debuffs and tried his best to deal damage to us. Thanks to my new setup on Luigi, my damage was far lower than it was when he was a mage, but it still wasn't that bad, and Prince gave us an extra turn, which kinda helped here because of High Pressure. Luis now just kinda used some mediocre attacks, and his turn ended when we dodged. Overall, I don't think this fight is very interesting. The most difficult move he used is a Tribe Condemned that instantly killed Juna, but I could simply just revive her and he didn't use the attack ever again. His other attacks usually missed, so the fight was very underwhelming, and I just kinda won without any resistance. But Luis wasn't done yet, so Luigi had to call upon the King archetype to take him down for good, and the day was saved. Luigi was later crowned king, we had like a 1-year time skip, which gave the party members funny new hats. We could now talk with like almost every somewhat important NPC one last time before heading to the Grand Cathedral, where Luigi decides he wants to go on one big adventure, then the party rides on the Gauntlet Runner, and the game ends. To summarize my thoughts on this challenge, I think it was a little too easy, especially towards the end. Like, once I got past the first dungeon of this game, the enemies just like stopped doing damage, which really made me regret not doing this run on Regicide, as if I was patient enough to reset for like 4 dodges in a row, I'm sure I could have beat this guy, and the rest of the game would have been far more interesting. I still ended up enjoying this game though, so if you can think of a challenge that might make this game hard, drop it in the comments as I might play this game again. Anyway, like the video and subscribe if you enjoyed. See ya, bye.